Some stories change lives. Some moments etch themselves into the soul, never to be erased. And then, there are those nights that redefine everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and betrayal. This is one of those stories. One that will leave you speechless. One that will make you question everything. A husband, a boss, a wife, and a night that shattered everything in the most unexpected way. What happened when I was alone with my husband's boss? Why did my hands tremble as I reached for the door? And why did my world come crashing down in ways I never imagined? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And trust me, you'll want to stay till the end. And also like, subscribe, and share. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear this. Maybe it will give them the strength to reclaim their own story again. It was the kind of life some only dream of. The kind wrapped in the warmth of whispered good mornings and sleepy forehead kisses. The kind where laughter echoed in sunlit rooms. Where love wasn't just spoken, it was felt. My husband, Daniel, was everything I had ever wished for. He was kind, attentive, the kind of man who made an ordinary moment feel like poetry. And oh, how we loved each other. I still remember the first time we met. How the world seemed to pause for just a breath. It wasn't a grand, cinematic encounter. No, it was simpler than that. It was the way he looked at me, as if I were the only person in the room. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way his laughter felt like home. But love, real love, is never without its storms. We had ours. We fought battles no one saw. The nights when silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. The moments when we were just two people trying to hold on, even when life pulled us in different directions. And yet, no matter how hard things got, we always found our way back to each other. Because what we had was real. Then came the dreams we built together. A home filled with the scent of morning coffee and fresh-cut flowers. A future where struggles turned into stories we would tell one day, laughing at how foolishly we worried. But beyond the walls of our love, there was something else. Someone else. A shadow neither of us saw coming. Daniel had always spoken of him with admiration. A man of power, of wisdom, of influence. His boss. I remember the way his voice would change when he spoke of him, laced with respect, with a longing to prove himself. He believes in me, Daniel would say, eyes gleaming with hope. He says I have potential, and I believed him. I believed in his dreams. I believed that this man, this mentor, would lead him to the success he had worked so hard for. But sometimes, admiration blinds us. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones we should fear. There were small things, little moments that, looking back, should have made me stop and wonder. The lingering pauses in Daniel's stories. The way his boss's name would fall from his lips, carrying something unspoken. The time he came home, face pale, hands trembling, but brushed it off with a tired smile. Just a long day at work, he had said, and I believed him. Oh, how I wish I hadn't. Because the life I thought was perfect, the love I thought was unbreakable, was about to be tested in a way I never could have imagined. And nothing would ever be the same again. It started with a phone call. Daniel had been pacing the living room, his phone pressed tightly against his ear, nodding along to words I couldn't hear. But I didn't need to. I could see it. The way his eyes sparkled, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the counter, as if holding on to something monumental. And then, in a breathless whisper, he turned to me, eyes alight with something close to reverence. He finally invited us over. His voice trembled with excitement, thick with hope, as if those 6 words alone held the weight of our future. This is huge for my career. I smiled. I nodded. I told him I was happy for him. But deep inside, something twisted. Something small. Something silent. A gut feeling. A whisper in the back of my mind. A shadow of unease that I couldn't explain. I should have listened to it. The night of the dinner arrived, cloaked in the golden glow of city lights. The air was thick with the scent of rain. A storm had passed earlier that day, leaving the streets damp and shimmering under the street lamps. Daniel squeezed my hand as we stood outside the grand, looming house, no estate, a mansion that stood like a monument to power itself. "This is it," he whispered, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "Everything's going to change after tonight." And in a way, he was right. Just not in the way he thought. The moment the door swung open, I was met with him. Daniel's boss. The man I had heard so much about. The man my husband idolized. He was everything I expected. Tall, well-dressed, a presence so commanding it filled the space like a force of nature. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted. A smile stretched across his lips, but it never quite reached his eyes. Ah, Daniel. Finally. His voice was smooth, deep, the kind that carried power effortlessly. Then, his gaze flickered to me. And you must be the lovely wife I've heard so much about. The way he said it, it was a compliment, but there was something else. Something beneath the surface, barely noticeable, but enough to make my spine stiffen. His grip was firm as he shook my hand. Too firm, as if testing something. I pulled away quickly, forcing a polite smile. Something felt off. Dinner was exquisite, lavish, every dish meticulously prepared, every sip of wine pouring like liquid gold. Laughter filled the air, smooth and effortless. Daniel was in his element, engaged, alive, soaking in every word his boss spoke as if they were gospel. And the boss, he was charming, effortlessly so. He commanded the room with an ease that was almost hypnotic, weaving tales of success and ambition, of power and possibility. Every word was laced with unspoken promises, as if being in his presence alone was a gateway to something greater. And yet, beneath the warmth, beneath the grandeur, something lurked, something unsettling. I saw in the way his eyes lingered, not just on me but on Daniel too, measuring, calculating. I felt it in the way the conversation shifted, his words wrapping around my husband like a spider spinning its web. Loyalty is everything in this business, Daniel. You understand that, don't you? Of course, sir. Good. That's what I like to hear. And then, his gaze returned to me. And a man is only as strong as the woman beside him. A statement. A compliment. But why did it feel like a warning? At some point in the evening, Daniel excused himself to take a phone call. I won't be long, he assured me with a soft squeeze of my hand. Stay here. Enjoy yourself. I nodded, forcing a smile as he disappeared into the next room. And just like that, I was alone. Alone with him. The room suddenly felt larger. Quieter. The air heavier. I took a slow sip of my wine, my fingers tightening around the glass. And then, you seemed tense. His voice was softer now. Lower. I swallowed hard, offering a small chuckle. Just not used to all this. All this. He tilted his head, watching me too closely. You mean power? I laughed lightly, but it was forced. And then, he stepped closer. Just a fraction. Just enough for the space between us to shrink, for the scent of his cologne to settle thickly in the air. You know, he mused, swirling his own glass lazily. I can always tell when someone doesn't belong in this world. I blinked, my heart hammering. Excuse me. It's nothing personal, dear. Some people are just meant for greater things. Others, well, a slow sip of wine. They struggle to keep up. There was again. That weight. That unspoken meaning behind his words. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. Something wasn't right. And for the first time that night, I realized this wasn't just dinner. This was something else. Something I wasn't prepared for. And Daniel wasn't here to see it. And then it happened. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. A shift in the air, a quiet disturbance, like the moment before a storm unleashes its fury. He set his glass down with slow, deliberate care. The sound of crystal meeting would echo through the room, too loud, too sharp. I forced a breath. My fingers tightened around the stem of my own glass. The warmth of the wine did nothing to soothe the chill creeping up my spine. He was still watching me, not with admiration. Not with politeness. No, this was something else. A calculation. A study. A game. You seemed nervous. The words were simple. Light. But there was weight beneath them. An edge I couldn't quite place. I swallowed, offering a polite smile. Just not used to being in places like this. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, his fingers laced together. Oh, but you should be. A pause. His gaze flickered to the doorway, where Daniel had disappeared minutes ago. Then, slowly back to me. You're married to a man on the rise. After all, power comes with certain expectations. A slow exhale. My pulse quickened. Expectations. A smile. One that didn't reach his eyes. Loyalty. The word lingered in the air, thick and heavy. I let out a small, nervous laugh, trying to shake the unease curling in my stomach. Of course, I support Daniel in everything he does. His smile widened, but there was something sinister about it. That's good to hear, because men like Daniel, they don't get far without the right support, without the right partners. His voice dipped lower, the room suddenly feeling much smaller. The right kind of woman by their side can make or break them. Something about the way he said it, slow, measured, deliberate, made my throat tighten. I shifted in my seat. I know my husband is capable of great things. His gaze darkened, amusement flickering across his features. Oh, I have no doubt. But let me ask you something. He leaned back in his chair, tilting his head slightly. What would you be willing to do to see him succeed? My stomach turned. I don't understand. A slow, deliberate sip of wine. A moment of silence stretching just a little too long. Come now, he murmured, voice like velvet over a blade. I think you do. I felt it then. The shift. The moment everything changed. I placed my glass down carefully, my hand suddenly unsteady. I think I should check on my husband. But before I could rise, his voice stopped me. Do you know what makes a man truly powerful? I hesitated. Control. The room felt colder now. And do you know what gives a man control? A beat of silence. The air between us so thick, it nearly suffocated me. Leverage. And then, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I know things, my dear. About Daniel. About his career. About his future. And trust me when I say, a slow smirk. A flicker of something cruel in his gaze. A single whisper from me could change everything. A chill rushed through me. I don't understand, I stammered, though my body already knew otherwise. Don't you? Another pause. A beat too long. And then, he reached for something on the table. A sleek, black envelope. He slid it toward me with a single finger. Inside this envelope is everything your husband has worked for. Everything he's ever wanted. A slow exhale. My hands trembled as I reached for it. But I hesitated. What is this? His eyes gleamed. A choice. My breath caught. What do you mean? He leaned back, exuding a quiet, effortless authority. Open it. Read it. And then decide how much Daniel's future is worth to you. My pulse thundered in my ears. Slowly, hesitantly, I pulled the envelope toward me. My fingers trembled as I opened it, my breath coming shallow. And when I saw what was inside, the room spun. My vision blurred. The realization hit like a freight train. I was trapped, and the one person I trusted most had unknowingly placed me in harm's way. The room felt like it was closing in. The edges of my vision blurred, my pulse hammering in my ears. The envelope sat open on the table before me, its contents burning into my mind like a brand. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. What I had just read, what I had just seen, wasn't just a threat. It was a promise of ruin, a promise that, with a single word, Daniel's entire future would crumble. And worse, it was a promise I couldn't outrun. Because now, I wasn't just a spectator to this twisted game. I was in it, a pawn in a match I never agreed to play. And the man across from me, Daniel's boss, was watching me with the calm, patient amusement of someone who already knew how this would end. You don't have to answer now, he murmured, reaching for his glass. But I suggest you think carefully. He took a slow sip, savoring the moment. Because one way or another decisions will be made. And just like that, he stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, straightening his tie, so composed, so unaffected, while my world was shattering. He started toward the door, just as Daniel's voice rang from the hallway, his footsteps approaching. Sorry about that, my husband called out. It was work, couldn't ignore it. My heart seized. He doesn't know. He has no idea. Ah, of course, his boss said smoothly, turning back just enough to glance at me, just enough for me to catch the knowing glint in his eyes. We were just having a little chat. Right, dear? I forced a nod. My throat felt raw. Right. Daniel walked in, eyes bright, oblivious to the horror unraveling right in front of him. Asterisk. Everything good? He asked, wrapping an arm around my waist. You look pale. I tried to smile. I had to smile. Just a little tired. It wasn't a lie. Not really. I was exhausted. Exhausted from holding in the scream, clawing at my throat. That night, lying beside my husband in the safety of our bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a battlefield of what-ifs. Do I tell him? Will he believe me? Or will I be the reason his dreams slip through his fingers? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The envelope, its damning contents, the smirk on his boss's face. I felt the weight of his words, the unspoken warning wrapped in velvet tones. And the worst part, I knew what Daniel would say. He's not like that. He believes in me. He's done so much for me. He trusts him. And if I told him, if I shattered that trust, what would that do to him? Would he look at me differently? Would he resent me? Would he even believe me? And if he did, what then? Would we be able to fight this? Or had I already lost? The fear slithered into my chest like a living thing, wrapping itself around my ribs, pressing down, suffocating. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Not until I knew what to do. Not until I had a way out. Days passed. Each morning, Daniel left for work with a smile, kissing me softly before heading off to the very place that now haunted me. And each time I watched him go, my stomach twisted, because I knew his boss was watching, waiting. The text started soon after. Subtle, nonchalant. I trust you're thinking things over. Time is a luxury, dear. Don't waste it. I'd hate for Daniel to lose everything he's worked for. Each message was a noose tightening around my throat. And I was alone in this. Or so I thought. Because then, the unexpected happened. A message. But not from him. From someone else. A name I hadn't seen in years. A name I never expected to see. The moment I read the words, my blood ran cold. You're not the first. Call me. A heartbeat of silence. And then, what do they mean? Not the first. How much do they know? And more importantly, could this be the way out? The moment had come. I stood in the living room, hands clenched at my sides, the weight of what I had learned pressing against my ribs like an iron cage. Across from me, Daniel paced, his forehead creased in frustration, his mind struggling to process what I had just told him. No, he muttered, shaking his head. That doesn't make sense. You must have misunderstood. A knife to the gut. I knew he would say that. I knew he would fight it. Because the truth I was handing him wasn't just about me. It was about everything. His dreams. His trust. His entire future. Daniel. My voice was steady, but inside, I was unraveling. I wouldn't lie about this. His hands raked through his hair. You don't understand. He's the reason I got here. He's the reason. He's a monster. I cut in, my voice sharp, trembling with emotion. And he's done this before. His gaze snapped to mine. What? I inhaled sharply, my pulse thudding. I'm not the first, Daniel. There have been others. The room fell into a suffocating silence. His eyes searched mine, desperate for something, anything, that would prove me wrong. But there was nothing. Just truth. Cold, bitter, undeniable truth. And then, his expression shifted. Shock. Confusion. Pain. The painful realization creeping in, unwelcome and unforgiving. Oh my God. His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw it. The breaking. The foundation of trust he had built, the years of admiration, of loyalty, all crumbling before him. And then, something else flickered in his eyes. Something dark. Where is he? The confrontation was inevitable. Daniel stormed into his boss's office, his fists clenched, his shoulders rigid with barely contained fury. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would shatter. We weren't alone. The office was full. Employees, executives, eyes wide, whispers already beginning to spread like wildfire. And there, sitting behind his massive oak desk, was him, unbothered, smug, as if he had been expecting us. Daniel, he greeted smoothly, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled together. I assume your wife has filled your head with nonsense. Daniel didn't hesitate. You sick son of a... Careful, his boss interrupted, a warning laced in his voice. You're treading dangerous ground. But Daniel wasn't listening. I trusted you. His voice shook, fury barely contained. I worshipped you. And all this time you were... What? His boss smirked, taking what was always mine. A gasp rippled through the room. And then, Daniel lunged. It happened so fast, his fist colliding with his boss's jaw, the crack of impact echoing off the walls. Papers scattered. A glass toppled over. The room erupted in chaos. And for the first time I saw it. Not just the power, but the fear. The fear in his boss's eyes. The dawning realization that this time, he had miscalculated. Because this wasn't going to be buried. Not this time. The downfall was swift. Within days, accusations surfaced. Others, women who had suffered in silence, began to speak. One by one, the facade he had built so carefully began to shatter. Lawsuits. Investigations. The company distancing itself from the man who once owned every room he walked into. And Daniel? He walked away. From the company. From the dream he once chased so blindly. It was never worth this, he told me one night, his arms wrapped tightly around me. None of it was. We had lost a lot. But in the end, we had won something greater. Freedom. Truth. And me? I had found my voice. I had reclaimed my story. I refused to be a victim. I whispered to myself one evening, staring out at the horizon. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. And now, I turn to you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have spoken up? Would you have fought back? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, like, subscribe, and share. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear this. And maybe, just maybe, it will give them the strength to reclaim their own story too.